Hello everyone, I'm the Goomba Gamer, and I'm here to talk to you about modern retro gaming. Now, during the pandemic, one of the things I leaned into was retro gaming in general and turning my upstairs into a game room. And I did a lot of projects, but one of the things I did that I'm really excited about was I bought a modern racing wheel for the express purpose of retro gaming. Now, I realize this isn't some brilliant new idea, but you don't actually hear this topic discussed very much. And the reason I wanted to make a video about it was it really opened me up to a retro gaming experience that I had kind of forgotten about or written off, I guess. And that is basically arcade style racing games from the 90s and late 2000s. And experiencing that with a wheel and pedal setup, because if you were a kid back then like I was when these games came out, it was just mind-blowing. Like, I remember seeing Daytona USA as like one of the first texture mapped 3D games, and it just was it was astounding at the time. It was just a generational leap. The downside was those games cost like $1 to play in like 1993 money. So if it takes 4 quarters to play Daytona, and you're probably going to fail out as a 13-year-old kid who doesn't know how to drive in about maybe a minute, you could spend those 4 quarters on a Street Fighter or Mortal Kombat cab and maybe get a win streak going, and it's a much more efficient use of your time. So eventually, we all know the 32-bit generation brought these arcade racers home, but we were playing on a controller. And while these games are fun, and I totally had a bunch of racing games as a kid, and you try to get better times, it's a different experience. And with emulation and modern retro gaming, getting a wheel set up really brings that arcade feel at home, and it lets you explore these racing games in a way that is you just didn't have before, unless like your uncle owned an arcade. So what I want to show you here was what I got. I'm just putting up footage of me playing through games, but if you look in the lower corner there, you can see my original setup for my wheel. I would just clamp it to the front of my PC desk. I'd use an old beach towel to protect the desk and stuff, and I just sit at my computer and play with it. And honestly, I spent the better part of a year off and on just getting through the original Daytona USA and Sega Rally. Now, this is because I'm a huge Sega fanboy when it comes to racing games. I don't think anybody did it better. And let me tell you, between those two games, that's 7 tracks, really, with only a handful of cars. But mastering it and just working through, like, having infinite credits means you don't just trivially beat the game. You have to work at this. Like, you could go and progress from, like, not finishing the race to finishing the race to getting top 3 to getting first place. And I've got videos of this on my channel if you want to watch my runs with an automatic car. That's because when I actually first got my wheel, it was just a wheel and pedals. And I'll admit, I was a little bit scared, so I decided I was just going to go automatic to be easy, and I didn't want to fiddle with the face buttons for the manual transmission. Now, one of the nice things about the wheel setup is that it is expandable, and I got for Christmas, after I got my wheel, I was given the shifter, which I promptly added on, and I kind of got to relearn all the games playing with a manual, which was just super fun. Now, the one problem, though, is that once you do put all the expansions on, and you're putting this wheel away, pulling it out, sitting it up, plugging it down, it does take a while, and it gets a little cumbersome. So I eventually splurged and bought myself a stand for it. And so when you do that, it does enable some pretty cool things, like moving the wheel in front of a large screen television and having your computer output to that, which resulted in this. So, a couple things to talk about for emulation of these old games. The Model 2 and Model 3 emulators are particularly good, and one of the really nice things about doing retro 3D gaming, a lot of the times those games just don't hold up at all. Like if you emulate a PlayStation or something, you look at the graphics, you go, ugh. They didn't age quite so well like the old 2D games kind of have. But the arcade hardware, when played through these emulators, can be rendered upscaled at modern resolutions. And it is actually shocking how well they actually hold up when you do that. Especially the Model 3 games. It was really almost ahead of its time for its hardware back in the day. And there are some games that never really got console ports, like Scud Race or I think it was Sega GT in the US. I can't remember. Regardless, super fun game. And when you're playing it with the wheel and pedal setup, it's really just that much more immersive. It just brings me back to being a kid when I did splurge on those few times at the racing machine that just captivated me as a young teenager. And now I have it all the time. I will say there are basically two downsides to getting into the wheel setup. It is not cheap. I actually only got into it after wanting to get a wheel for a while because I had a special work assignment and I had a bunch of overtime, and then they also like threw in like, hey, here's some Amazon gift cards, which covered most of the cost of the wheel, which I got on sale for like $250. The shifter was another 60, and then the stand setup was like another, I think, 75, I guess, which if you add it all up comes to a pretty penny. Spread out over time, it's not really that bad. So this is definitely something you could start with and then build up, although the initial investment is more than I would like it to be. It's definitely a lot of fun, and I think worth it overall if you like racing games and kind of have a nostalgia for the old arcade feel. The only other downside, I think, is how complex the driver software can be. You have to set up profiles for most games for arcade. You want to limit the wheel to 270 degrees rotation. These wheels are generally built for simulation, not for arcade racing. So you have to set up your profile. Sometimes you have to set your profile for the emulator itself. And if you're doing like modern arcade game emulation through TechnoParrot, which actually runs an executable because modern arcade machines are basically gaming PCs, you have to make sure that the profile you create in the driver software applies to the executable that gets run when you use TechnoParrot. But overall, I mean, if you're used to emulation, you're used to probably tinkering, the setup is really a lot of fun once you get it going. Highly recommended if it's something you haven't thought of and you want to add something to your game room or retro gaming setup. I think this is something that gets easily overlooked. So, thanks for watching.